Good morning. I'm Amy Brendmoen, President of the St. Paul City Council and Councilmember for Ward 5. Today, I join you virtually from St. Paul City Hall with our brand new murals to offer this welcome amid the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which prevents us from being together in person for the Mayor's 2021 budget address. For all those watching us today, including my colleagues on the St. Paul City Council, our partners in Ramsey County, and from our state and federal legislative delegations, the members of our St. Paul Public School Board, our department leaders, our incredible city employees, and our residents, workers, labor partners, and business owners from neighborhoods across St. Paul, thank you so much for your continued commitment to our city, and thank you for joining us virtually today. We are living in the moment of COVID-19, a global health pandemic. We have lived in uncertainty as the spread of an unfamiliar virus has forced us to stay at home, away from work, school, friends. Families and businesses across our community are struggling to make ends meet, and those already vulnerable to the economic impacts of this crisis have faced even greater challenges. We are immersed in the movement for racial justice, and we are facing and confronting our nation's troubling history of violence and racism that have traumatized generations of Black and brown people. COVID and the murder of George Floyd exposed broken institutions, inequitable systems, and failed leadership. They have brought into the light our most critical tasks at hand: to confront, to heal, and to rebuild something that works for everyone. These are indeed unprecedented and historic times. These times make the work we do in our city at this moment even more critical. And I am so proud to be here in St. Paul with innovative, bold leaders, empathetic community members, and invested stakeholders. If you are watching this address right now, I know that you are one of our teammates in this work and that you share a commitment to our city. I also know that I speak for my colleagues when I say, we are committed to working with you, the mayor, our city leaders, staff, and community partners to ensure that every voice, big or small, is considered. This shared commitment will help carry all of us forward as we engage in this work and continue to move through this ongoing pandemic and toward racial justice. The Mayor's 2021 budget address today is a milestone in the conversation about how we will build our pathway forward together. My colleagues on the City Council and I look forward to the work of analyzing and finalizing a 2021 budget by the end of the year. Thank you again for being with us today, and I now have the privilege of introducing my friend and teammate, the Mayor of St. Paul, Melvin Carter, to present his 2021 City of St. Paul budget address. Mayor?
Thank you, Council President Brendmoen. To you, Council President, members of the St. Paul City Council, other elected officials on Team St. Paul, our city employees, residents, and business leaders. Good morning, and thank you for joining me for my 2021 budget address. We come together at this time at the center of a deep set of compound crises that face our planet, our country, and our city. From a global health pandemic that has resulted in over 5,000 confirmed cases in St. Paul and 130 lives lost right here in our city, to an economic crisis that has hit us hard, with over 70,000 St. Paul workers who have filed for unemployment since March 15th, with renters and homeowners who are struggling to maintain their housing once foreclosure and eviction moratoriums expire, to businesses across our city that are shuttered or operating in a limited capacity, to a record number of families facing unsheltered homelessness in our community right now, to a national increase in violent crime, to the all too familiar trauma and reckoning on race following the tragic murder of George Floyd, and of course, to rebuilding from the civil unrest of this summer that damaged or destroyed over 300 St. Paul businesses in one horrible night of destruction. Facing all of these crises at the same time has taken its toll on all of us, on every household, on every business, on every student, and on our city government too, as our all-hands-on-deck efforts to support struggling families and businesses has stretched us to our limits. While crafting this budget in this moment is one of the toughest tasks I've ever faced, it's put into perspective only by literally everything else going on in the world, and of course by my wonderful family and young baby at home. I'm grateful to the residents, business leaders, city employees and department heads, and city council members and our cabinet members who have willingly stepped forward with wise counsel to help. Over the past 3 years, we've reminded ourselves and each other that our budget isn't just a math problem. It's a values exercise. Every year I've reminded you of our mantra. If our budget doesn't reflect our values, then they're not our values. While our margins this year, while our numbers this year are tighter than ever before, that fundamental truth still remains. So we started with 2 core values that shaped every decision in this budget. 1, we value you. We value our community. At the heart, St. Paul isn't just a collection of buildings and streets, but a community of people, children and families, workers and entrepreneurs, artists, innovators, and cultural leaders. While our struggles may look and feel different from one side of town to the other, we are all hurting, we're all struggling, and we're all challenged beyond belief by the economic uncertainties these unprecedented events of 2020 have created for us. The only thing that puts our current city budget situation into perspective, like I said earlier, is literally everything else going on in the world right now. Because our uncertainties are a reflection of the pain and pressure that every member of our St. Paul family is facing, simply passing that pain forward to our residents and businesses in the form of a hefty property tax increase would make our problems worse, not better. 2, we value the police officers, firefighters and paramedics, the rec leaders and librarians, the workers who maintain our public infrastructure, and the dedicated professionals who support all of these critical public services. From librarians sewing masks, to rec leaders delivering food, to firefighters and police officers who heroically stood in the gap between our city and further devastation on the most destructive night in city history. The commitment and dedication of our city employees has been on full display every day of 2020. Today, more than ever, St. Paul residents and businesses are relying on high-quality city services. Even in the face of unprecedented budget challenges, we must protect and preserve the frontline services and staff that our residents and businesses rely on as much as possible. Because these truths are so self-evident, the most important number in the budget that I'm proposing today is 0. To avoid adding financial pressure to the residents and businesses who are already struggling, my budget proposes 0 increase to the city's property tax levy. To protect the first-rate public services we have rightfully grown to expect from our city employees, my budget intentionally avoids laying off city staff. And finally, my budget proposal does not tap the city's fund balance reserves in order to maximize our readiness to face the remaining uncertainties ahead. 0. While budget gimmicks and one-time fixes might help improve our spreadsheets today, our real goal must always be to prepare our city for tomorrow. As proud as I am that we were able to maintain each of these competing goals in this budget proposal, that task was far from easy and required a set of significant and painful decisions which I cannot imagine making in any other circumstance that we have to solve for. This year, that budget challenge was significantly higher, $19.5 million. To put that number into perspective, that means I would have to propose a 13% increase to the city's property tax levy in order to solve these budget challenges without raising taxes or reducing services and spending. Between upward pressures on our spending, that start with our COVID-19 response, of which we are over $16 million into now and still going, to our civil unrest response, which cost nearly $4 million to the city. Those things have had an impact of widening that gap. Further, downward pressures on our revenues, all of the revenues that we rely on, from property taxes to sales taxes to parking revenues to building permits, create an additional amount of pressure on all other budget items. In order to land the plane on a budget that neither raises property taxes nor lays off city staff, it put a lot of pressure on every other budget item. In this process, we explored and I accepted every viable reduction strategy we could in every core department to meet these goals. To be clear, this budget will result in significant pain points for our community. Our city employees will likely face reduced hours, reduced titles. As we manage our vacancies and attrition, that will likely lead to staffing challenges across city departments. These things will create challenges for all of us that we will have to see through together. To lead the way, we've already enacted a voluntary 10% pay reduction for every member of our senior leadership team. Still, our ability to maintain this delicate balance over the next few months of this budget cycle will depend on a wide set of variables, including the trajectory of the pandemic and economy, and our ability to work with all of our bargaining units to negotiate favorable labor contracts. Moving forward, I have challenged our leaders to approach this budget and to approach the immediate future in our city with a couple of strategies in mind. First, we have to think beyond just reducing or just scaling back our budgets to being willing to rethink all of our core business models. One of the best examples of that is the basic life support unit that we've created in our fire department. We had this conversation last year about our opportunity that we've now seized to staff a set of ambulance units across our city with EMTs who are trained and able to respond to St. Paulites who have less critical emergencies, sprained ankles and different things like that, in a way that still provides a response when we need it, while leaving our paramedics and our full ambulances available to respond to our more critical and acute emergencies. In order to build our city for the future, the one department that we have increased our investment in is our Office of Technology and Communications. The reason should be obvious. In the context of a pandemic, in the context of social distancing, in the context of people working from home, we'll need new strategies, new resources, and new approaches to ensure that you, our residents, our business leaders, our innovators, our artists, and our city staff can access the city's infrastructure remotely. Finally, while a budget like this could push us to shrink inwardly and prioritize our budget spreadsheets over the quality of life in our neighborhoods, no response could be more wrong. We will continue to push toward our big vision for our city. That starts with finding a new way to better support individuals and families in our community who have experienced unsheltered homelessness. A significant portion of our budget solutions this year were made with the help of Governor Walz, who took $23 million of the CARES funding that the state of Minnesota received from the federal government and made it available to the city of St. Paul to help address this budget crisis. We have made the decision that with those resources, we are going to make a strong commitment to individuals in our community experiencing homelessness. This work has been led very well, very capably, by our Deputy Mayor, Jamie Tincher, who will continue to lead this work forward. I have directed that of our COVID funding that we've received from the state, that approximately $11 million of that funding will go towards creative, new approaches to connect individuals who have experienced unsheltered homelessness to support, to resources, and to housing, that work will benefit our entire community. I imagine many of you have also seen that I have signed on this summer as a founding member of a national organization called Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. If we didn't know it in 2019, 2020 has demonstrated for us the extent to which our stock market economy and our street level economy have diverged paths from one another. As our stock market has grown and produced significant returns for the asset holding class, our neighbors, our residents, our families and workers are facing the most dire and challenging economic times of our lives. Moving forward beyond this moment isn't about just getting back to where we were a few months or a few years ago. It's about rethinking the connectivity between our neighbors and our economy. And so with our COVID dollars and with funds that we have been able to raise through our Office of Financial Empowerment, we will be launching a guaranteed income demonstration pilot with the goal of helping even more low-income families in our community who need it right now more than ever, while contributing to the national science that will allow us to continue to advocate for this type of necessary policy on the state and federal levels. As a kid growing up, I saw those movies, I saw those TV shows that showed an economic reality that in order to sell groceries or rent videos in our neighborhoods, those companies had to employ our neighbors. That's no longer the case. And that's a core reason why we have to continue to rethink our approach to building our city's economy. Another centerpiece of our work moving forward will be the evolution of our Community First public safety framework. As we dig into the work that our police officers do on our behalf, and especially the work that they will be tasked with in the coming year, as they too navigate the challenges created by our vacancy and attrition targets that have allowed us to prevent laying off officers, firefighters, and other public workers. It's critical that we look into our data. We have committed ourselves in St. Paul to a public safety strategy that doesn't just center around responding as quickly as possible after something bad has happened, but to a strategy that invests in proven interventions to help reduce the likelihood that those bad things will happen in our community in the first place. As we look into our data for 911 calls and the work that our police officers do, it's readily apparent, something that our officers has told us for quite some time, that they end up serving as more than just police officers in our community. They end up serving as social workers, as mental and chemical health therapists, as housing counselors, and in a number of other capacities. Our goal moving forward will be to identify other resources to serve, to step in, to respond to some of those 911 calls that may not necessarily require an armed police officer, with the goal of lightening the load for our officers. We know they run from call to call, and that's challenging for them. Our goal is to lighten the load for our officers so that they can spend their time focused on the reasons probably they became an officer in the first place, on helping us to prevent and respond to violent crime, and the proactive community outreach that the St. Paul Police Department is well known for nationally. 3 years ago, when I was elected mayor, I spent a lot of time working on my inaugural address. About 3 weeks trying to get it right. And yet here we are 3 years later. And the line from that speech that I hear repeated most often is one that was just said as an aside. I was sharing with you my belief that our route to a bigger, better city centered not just around the work of one person in one office, but it's centered around our ability to work together and build sweat equity in our city through service. Some of you clapped, And I ended up saying, don't clap if you're not going to help. And I was proud to be in St. Paul, in a city where even more people clapped after I said that than before I said that. In the coming weeks, we'll return to that ethic. We will launch a set of efforts to continue inviting you to help us move our city forward through service. All of our work, basic income, public safety, rebuilding from the toll of economic shutdowns and civil unrest, all of that work will be guided by the deep public engagement that has marked our administration from day one. This budget conversation, too, will be guided by public conversation. It's the case every year, but especially this year, because our budget hinges on so many critical variables that will play out between now and December. This budget address marks not the end of a conversation, but only the beginning. I invite you to continue to participate in this conversation as you do every year to help us land the plane on a budget that helps move St. Paul forward. I think of the early days of the St. Paul Promise neighborhood about 10 years ago, and this idea that had just existed on the whiteboard in my Ward 1 office was suddenly coming to fruition. We stood there outside Wilder Foundation as about 200 people came into that space, and one community elder walked in, and I thanked him for being there, and he said, listen, I'm just going to sit back, and I'm going to stay quiet, and I'm going to see if this ends up being what it needs to be for our community. I told him there need be no suspense. If you sit back and stay quiet, there's no way this can be what it needs to be for our community. This budget is the same way. This marks the beginning of our conversation, and ending it correctly is going to require your engagement, your wisdom, your expertise. That's especially true this year. I'm proud of St. Paul. I'm proud of the way our community, and specifically our public workers, have stepped forward to serve us through this crisis. We've suspended water shutoffs so every family can afford to wash their hands. We've made $4 million available to struggling small businesses and low-income families through our Bridge Fund. We've worked to open space to safely exercise, recreate, and enjoy the great outdoors on our streets and around our lakes. We have redeployed public parks and recreation workers to make food deliveries. Our librarians have sewn masks. Our Department of Safety and Inspections staff has worked with bar owners and restaurateurs to help them open sidewalk cafes. And our police officers, paramedics, and a broad community of people have worked together to serve our unsheltered homeless population in unprecedented ways. I'll be forever grateful for the police officers and firefighters who have served our city heroically over the course of this summer, particularly in the civil unrest that followed the murder of George Floyd. And I'm proud of you. In a COVID-19 pandemic economy this past spring, we saw the way we stepped up to help one another get through. Restaurants who, in the face of shutdown orders, turned their focus and attention and energy to giving food away so that all of our families could eat. Businesses who, after the civil unrest, turned their parking lots into supply exchanges, even before fixing their own windows. And we'd see people in the parking lot exchanging clothing, food, formula, diapers, and whatever else they need. This spirit was embodied in one business owner who, after having her business completely destroyed in the civil unrest, stood there in front of her building and said to me, "Mayor, I've lost everything." I told her, "I know, and I'm sorry for that, and we'll be with you as you rebuild." And she looked at me and said, "No, I meant to say I have time to help other people and be part of the solution." Even in the face of all of the challenges in front of us right now, my hopefulness continues to be rooted in you. The fact that St. Paul residents and businesses in crisis keep doubling down to help one another through bodes well for our community. As we stay physically distant in response to the public health recommendations that we are all hearing from our scientists and medical community, let's remember to stay socially connected because we need each other. We need our framework. We need our families and our community right now more than ever. If we continue to work together in that true spirit of St. Paul, embodied by our former Senator Paul Wellstone's famous words, "We all do better when we all do better." If we can continue to work together in that spirit, I'm confident that we can land solidly on a city budget and, far more importantly, a pathway to the future that truly reflects our values and our collective love for this phenomenal city. If I know anything about St. Paul, I know that we are up to the task. See you soon.